Chapter 31. Nora Frey, Supreme Victory. Nora panted softly as she eased herself into the warm green mineral spring bath. Once she was submerged to her shoulders, she leaned back and let out a sigh as she felt the tension in her aching limbs melt away. Nora closed her eyes and smiled as she inhaled the scent of red rose petals that glided through her fingers and sat her head on her soft, fresh white towel as she gazed up through heavy-lidded eyes and contentedly watched as the steam spiraled up into the polished marble dome oculus above her. This was what supreme victory felt like. She had gone flying again today. Winter was so happy. She had never seen a dragon so happy. She was like a brand new fledgling. Now that they were bonded, she allowed the excited Hendrik to go explore by herself. Winter needed to get in touch with her feral side, just so long as she didn't cause any property damage or harass the citizens. She could go wherever she liked, within reason. Nora now had the ability to compel the dragon to return to her at any time. She could do the same to Vila if she wished, but she knew she wouldn't have to. As far as Winter was concerned, she was now her human, and this was her nest that she would always protect and return back home to. Nora put a rose petal to her lips and licked off the dew. God, she needed Vila. She wanted him so badly, but she would wait. He would come back. Vila always came back, and if she felt this way about him, he would be saturated with desire when he got back. She would pretend not to, of course, and she would make him suffer for as long as she could bear it. Nora sighed as she extended her consciousness to find him. He greeted her with a kiss. A shiver of excitement rippled through her as she felt his hand caress her skin beneath the water. "Where are you?" she murmured into his ear, letting him feel her hot, hungry breath on his chilled cheek through the soul bond. "We're heading home now," he assured her, and sent her a mental image of the obsidian knife and the sacred mountain they were leaving behind. Nora grimaced. "Now that you have completed your pilgrimage, I can fly over and fetch you," she purred. Vila chuckled. "Do you want me to come back, Ersic?" he teased. Nora grit her teeth and closed her eyes. She wanted him back. "I'll make it up to you," she pouted. Vila hummed. "I must honor Halvisti and complete the pilgrimage on foot," he insisted. Nora's thin nostrils flared with frustration. She wondered if it was normal to be jealous of a volcano. "Bloody damned Halvisti," she cursed. "Please do not curse." "Or what? Is she going to smite me?" Nora huffed agitatedly. "Do not tempt the goddess. We will return shortly. I must go. There will be some dangerous terrain up ahead. I must be on alert," he insisted. Nora was surprised to sense the nervous energy and sincerity in his voice, and so, with scathing reluctance, she allowed him to withdraw from her. Once she was alone, she cursed again. "Bloody Halvisti," she murmured, as she focused her mind elsewhere. She was curious what Winter was up to. She could sense the frost dragon was nearby and was bubbling with excitement about something. But when she tried to inquire what it was, the cheeky Hendrik blocked her and chortled happily as she glided down and landed on the roof. Nora winced as she heard the long talons punch holes into the thin green sheets of bronze. As Winter happily clambered over to the little round opening in the dome above her. Winter thrummed excitedly. She was desperately trying to get her attention. Nora reluctantly opened her eyes. Winter poked her head through the oculus and looked down. The dragon had something in her jaws, but it was obscured by the rising mist. "What do you have?" Nora inquired. A mangled, smelly mountain goat carcass splashed into the rose-scented water. Nora quickly rose and threw her robe around herself. "Winter! I just moved in. I just had everything cleaned. What am I supposed to do with this?" she exclaimed. Winter tilted her head to the side and insisted that Nora was hungry. Nora glanced over toward the goat that was floating in the middle of her bath, cinched up her drawstring, and buried her head into her palm. "No!" she shouted. It was too late. A log splashed down and drenched her warm, dry robe with dirty, dead goat water droplets. "The gods hate me," Nora muttered. Winter blinked. It was clear she didn't know what gods were, or how to deal with them. Nora sighed. She tried to think of how to explain such things so that a dragon would be able to understand. Giant, invisible beings, big, mean, invisible, human-like beings that ruined her life. But the more she thought about it, the more ridiculous it sounded, and so she quickly decided to change the topic entirely. "You have your own pool. I don't like dead animals and sticks in my bath," she tried to reason. "And I am not hungry," she insisted. Nora sighed. She was actually a little hungry. "All right, yes, I'm hungry, but next time leave it by the door or something," she insisted. "Fire the goat," Winter chirped. Nora braced her hands on her hips and glowered up at Winter. The dragon had developed quite the taste for cooked meat. "Very well, but no more animals or sticks in my bath. I don't like them there," she insisted. "And no rocks either," she added. But Winter had already taken off and was now pacing about in the courtyard, waiting for her cooked goat. "Camille! Len!" Nora called. The two serving girls in black dresses and white aprons quickly came in to assist her. "Can we get you anything, Magi?" Camilla asked. The two girls gasped in fright as Nora pointed toward the goat and large stick floating in the water. "Drag the goat to the kitchen and then drain and wash the pool," she instructed. "Would you like a fresh robe?" Camilla offered. "Thank you," she agreed. Once Nora was dressed, she strolled out onto the patio and smiled over toward Winter, who was chortling happily as she devoured the boiled goat in the courtyard. The poor creature had been dropped, flung about, and dropped again and again, and gods knew what, perhaps into a pig pen or a marsh or two. Winter didn't seem to mind at all. Nora was glad to cater to her dragon. The more things she knew Winter liked, the more she could barter with. Winter didn't understand many human things, but she was bright enough to understand rudimentary concepts of trading. The only conflict they had was when Winter assumed Nora felt the same way about gnawing on sticks as she did, or a big half-eaten fish head, like the one currently left on her patio. Nora wrinkled her nose. The tuna fish's big eyes stared back at her. With a sigh, she levitated it over the railing and let it flop onto the ground. Winter glanced up at her. The dragon's big black obsidian eyes were full of wounded rejection. "I have my own food. I am not a fledgling," Nora snapped. "But I thank you for the kind gesture," she added, as tactfully as she could. Winter perked up a little. "No, I don't want any more, thank you." The dragon tilted her head. "What do I like?" Nora repeated. She hesitated. "I love flying. I like spending time with you. I like your beautiful scales," she added, and pointed to the polished white dragon scale earrings. Winter blinked again, and Nora got an image of herself in a shimmering, white-scale, form-fitting gown. For a moment, she was worried about what Don Rascal would think, but she sensed if she rejected the offering, Winter would be pricked to the heart. She could not refuse. "That would be lovely," she agreed. She felt warm and bubbly at the thought of Vila seeing her in it when she greeted him at the door. To feel his eyes gaze on her bare back as she guided him into her hard-won home. She didn't have to wear it out in public, but she could keep it as her own secret treasure. Right then, a thought blossomed in her mind in the form of a question. Where was her mate? The dragon inquired through the soul bond. Nora blinked, suddenly aware that her dragon was still intently fixated on her. She felt her cheeks blush, and she gave a gesturing motion out toward the snow-capped volcano off in the distance. "Someplace out there," she sighed, and shook her head as Winter suggested bringing him back. "He does not like flying," Nora chuckled softly, and shook her head as Winter suggested that he should just start off by gliding, and then he would learn to like it later. Nora smiled. "If he isn't back within the week, I will consider it," she agreed at last. Winter tilted her head, clearly confused by the span of time. Nora projected the image of the sun rising and falling 8 times. Winter blinked. The dragon's concept of time wasn't at all like her own, but at least she seemed to settle on that they would not get him today. The ground heaved. A vase shattered and a bookshelf came crashing down in a room. Nora leaned forward and grabbed the hand-railing, but as suddenly as it had come, the earth became still again. Nora crumpled to the floor, and she writhed on the ground and gasped for breath. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. "I'm sorry," came a faint voice from within the soul bond. It was Vila. He was dying. Nora let out a shrill scream, and she clawed at her throat. "I love you," Vila called, and with a small caress on her cheek, she felt him slip unconscious. "Vila! Don't give up! Don't let go!" she sobbed. Winter flew onto the roof and began pattering helplessly in panic circles while the servants hastily dragged Nora inside. It's all right. It happens all the time," Camilla assured her, but Nora shook her head, and she wouldn't be consoled. She couldn't breathe. She felt the horrible, cold, oppressive weight crushing the air out of her lungs, but she couldn't let go of the bond. She grasped at Vila's hand. She wouldn't let go of it. She wouldn't let go. She tried to bring him back, but it hurt so much. She couldn't breathe. Nora retched as she struggled to get up onto her hands and knees. She felt broken and bruised all over, but she knew the pain she felt was Vila's pain. She forced herself to shield her mind from his suffering so she could rise up to her feet. "You should rest, Magi," Lynn insisted. Nora shook her head. "No, I can't. I need to go to him. He needs me," she rasped as she stumbled over and knelt before Havisti's shrine. "Please, spare him, please. It was me, she wailed. "Havisti, please spare him," she pleaded. "What is it? What's wrong? What happened?" Lynn begged. But Nora pushed past her and ran back outside. Winter was already waiting and ready for her, and she took off into the sky. As much as she wanted to go straight to Vila, she would not allow her emotions to run away with her. She couldn't live with herself if she flew all the way only to have him die in her arms. She needed to mend her. Traja! Nora set her sights on Magi Traja's large house that was just down the hill. Her head mender didn't know it yet, but Nora was going to take the mouthy troll on a little ride. While she couldn't exactly command Traja to do anything against her will, Menders were obligated to fulfill their role and to heal those under their care. Traja could curse and even spit in Nora's face, but she was obligated by pain or death to render aid. Instead of landing in the courtyard and politely barging in like she had done with the governor, this time she had Winter land on Traja's roof. As predicted, after a loud clatter and adding a few extra gaping ventilation holes, both Magi Traja and her servants came running out to see what was going on. Nora posed on top of Winter and soothed the dragon with gentle strokes down the side of her neck. "Head Mender Traja, you are to come with me immediately." Traja stared up at her and then at her dragon with her mouth agape. What? She exclaimed. "My house! Your dragon has destroyed my roof, and I am in the middle of dinner," she protested. Nora urged Winter forward, and the dragon neatly glided down. The servants bolted off in all directions. "I am not going anywhere with you!" Traja shrieked as she was suddenly levitated into the air. "Put me down!" she wailed. Winter let out an excited chortling sound as Nora took the frantic, flailing Mender and draped her over the Hendrake's back. "Help! Help me! She's gone crazy! She's going to kill me! Help! I am being kidnapped!" Traja wailed, but nobody dared come to her aid, and soon her yammering was drowned out by the thresh of dragon wings as they soared up into the air, and her cries for help soon turned to pitiful sobs for mercy. I'm sorry. I take back everything I said. Don't kill me," Traja pleaded. "Shut up and hold still. It's an emergency, and I need you mostly in one piece," Nora snapped. Traja let out one last angry shriek. "You'll never get away with this. I'm going to the general," she vowed. Chapter 32. Nothing is Free. The avalanche had buried him. It had buried them all. Vila couldn't tell up from down. He couldn't breathe. In his last moments, he called out to Nora. His only regrets was letting her down. At least she would have Winter. At least she would not be completely alone. He tried to comfort her, begged her to release him, to let him find an end to his suffering. Just as he began to slip into unconsciousness, something stabbed him in the face. Vila let out a ragged gasp as fresh air filled his lungs, and he suddenly came back to the land of the living. He blinked several times. "Hey!" he exclaimed. "The 16-year-old boy known as Shadow has stolen his helmet." Shadow jumped back and quickly began trying to rebury him. Vila growled. With all his strength, he punched his right arm out of the snow. "Come back here!" he growled. Shadow quickly darted away and began digging again until he uncovered another soldier's head, and on, going down the line. Vila grit his teeth, and he turned and followed his lead. Lieutenant Grogin groaned as he was helped from the snow. Come on, wake up! I need your help," he barked. Grogin nodded and feebly crawled over to help dig out Captain Wallace and then Major Orrin. "Vila!" Orrin gasped in surprise. "I'm so sorry. I owe you," Orrin gasped. Vila chuckled. "Thanks, Shadow." He pointed toward the strange young man going down the opposite way, pulling the soldiers out free from the snow. Orrin squinted his eyes. "Blood and iron, he looks just like you. Minus the tattoos and ugly face," he wheezed, and held his cracked rib cage as he let out a ragged laugh. Somehow, someway, they managed to free everyone from beneath the snow. Some were severely injured, ranging from broken arms and legs to concussions and broken ribs. An hour later, a soldier cried out and pointed to the sky. Vila grinned as he watched Nora and her dragon come flying over the mountains. Winter came in low, and a woman in a bright red silk cloak was shoved over the side and went sprawling face first into the snow. Vila smirked. Nora had mentioned her encounter with her new chief mender. It seemed apparent Nora had finally gotten even with her new frenemy. Then again, Nora could have just as likely grabbed the closest and best mender she could find in such a short time. Keeping his composure, Vila hurried over and helped the spluttering mender up. "It's good you came. We have lots of injured," he declared, as he quickly guided her over toward Major Orrin to get his ribs mended, and partially hoping to get her busy and out of his hair as soon as possible. Treja's eyes widened when she saw the large group of groaning soldiers and quickly ran over to help. Once he had finally gotten rid of the mender, Vila's attention quickly turned toward Nora, who had neatly touched down a short distance away. Nora slid off Winter's bare back and bounded through the deep snow and flung herself into Vila's arms. "I thought I lost you forever," she sobbed. Vila held her tight and nestled his face into her dark auburn-red hair and took in the warm scent of rose and cinnamon. "Almost," he croaked softly. "Without Shadow, we would have been lost," he sighed. Nora blinked. "Shadow? Where is he? I must formally thank him," she insisted. "What is his rank?" she asked. Vila grimaced. "What is it?" She sensed Vila was wrestling with something he wasn't sure how to explain to her. Nora blushed. She felt a bit guilty for assuming Shadow had to be a man. It just seemed to be a safe bet, since all the soldiers she had seen were male. "Is Shadow a she?" she asked. Vila laughed. "No, it's just that, well, he isn't quite old enough to enlist, you see," he explained. Nora blinked. She sensed there was something more to it than that. She waited for Vila to continue, but he quickly changed topics. "The men need food and wood for a fire," he insisted. Nora nodded and gave him another quick embrace. "Yes, of course," she agreed. "Take care. I will be back shortly," she assured him. Vila smiled. "Thank you," he managed to croak through a hoarse voice, but Nora had already scrambled up onto Winter's back. Vila glanced over toward Treja. She had moved on and was now tending to the rest of the soldiers. "What do we do now?" Orrin asked hesitantly. "For now, let's get out of the wind and build up temporary shelters. Magi Frey will be back with supplies. We will figure out what to do after everyone is rested," he instructed, and the command was relayed down the line. Orrin grabbed him by the shoulder. "What are we going to do about Shadow?" he asked worriedly. Vila grimaced. "We had better come up with a good way to explain to the Magi about the Shadow situation," he grunted. Orrin nodded. "He deserves a medal or something," he insisted. Vila couldn't help but grin. "He can have my helmet and as much food as he can carry," he chuckled. What about, sending him up to Founders? You said you would talk to Magi Frey about it," he insisted. Vila grunted. "I know. I'm just trying to figure that out. Magi Frey will want to reward him in some way. I just need to find the right way of introducing Shadow to her, is all," he sighed. Orrin grimaced. "Yeah, I see your point. The kid wouldn't know what to do with the medal," he groaned. "I suppose I ain't no decent father, but it's a bit late now. All we managed to do is teach him how to give a good punch, polish boots, shoot a bow, and wallop people over the head with the wooden practice sword. Everything else he sort of learned on his own, I guess," he lamented. Vila offered a reassuring smile. "He might be a good sword companion after all," he chuckled softly. Orrin quickly brushed a fur-gloved hand across his face and nodded. "Yeah, he's a tough little bugger," he agreed. Just let me do the talking, and we'll work something out. Nora isn't the sort that will forget a good thing. We just have to make sure she thinks this is her idea, he insisted. Orrin nodded. Makes sense, he agreed. Vila put his arm on Orrin's shoulder. I meant it. Let me do the talking, no matter how ridiculous I sound or what I say. I trust you, Orrin agreed, and then he quickly became still as Traja came storming back toward them. Vila could tell whatever she was about to say was not going to be good. "How is, everything, Headbender?" he asked. Traja glared over toward Vila, then toward Orrin. They need rest, but other than that, nobody's going to die or be horribly mangled. At least, not until I get back to Helvisti, she chimed. Orrin attempted a smile. That's good. Thank you for coming so soon. Traja bristled and whipped around and glowered her big, bulging hazel eyes up at Vila. When General Samuth Gordon hears about this, she began. Vila quickly cut her off. I will see. Nora sends her regards, and you will get a medal for this, he assured her. Traja blinked, and then blinked again. But I... You think so? She asked. Vila nodded, and discreetly elbowed Orrin in the side. Orrin smiled, and nodded along as well. Yes, of course. Yes, thank you for coming, he agreed. Traja fidgeted about and straightened her tunic. I was just doing my duty, she shrugged dismissively. Naturally, I would have come sooner if I had known, she added. Traja glanced over toward Orrin, but the major quickly excused himself. Yes, well, I should, help the men, he announced, and hurriedly trotted off. Traja tisked and shook her head. Man, they crawl on bended knee when they need something, and then bolt as soon as they get it, she scowled. Chapter 33. To the Rescue. You did wonderful, Winter, she praised. I know you're tired, but we have one more trip. We need to bring back food and supplies, she announced. Winter thrummed, and Nora let out an excited laugh as the dragon did a triple barrel roll to prove that she was more than capable of completing the task. Nora couldn't remember ever having more fun. She couldn't wait to read or hear Traja's report to General Gordon. She wondered how the mender would spin it. As it was now, Traja had refused to come help, and Nora had dragged her off against her will and forced her to do her job. Ooh, I see a tasty caribou, Nora announced. Winter chirped excitedly. She got the mental image from Nora, quickly banked hard to the left, and locked in onto the herd of caribou crossing a glistening, white frozen lake. Nora grinned as wind raced through her hair. She waited and baited silence as the caribou hadn't a clue what lurked above them. Suddenly, Winter dropped out of the sky, and they were plummeting down at a breakneck speed. By the time the caribou saw the dragon's shadow over top of them, it was too late. Winter's jaws snapped shut around its neck and flung it up into the air like a rag doll. Nora gasped in wonder as she clung onto the dragon as they went soaring back into the air in a glorious victory spiral. She wasn't in control at all. She was just hanging on. It was all Winter, and the frost dragon was having fun as she caught the caribou in her talons and carried it back. Nora had Winter drop it off before making one last trip to bring back a bundle of dried-out sticks and logs to start a big cooking fire. By the end of it all, she could sense Winter was starting to feel fatigued, and she could feel her dragon's dull ache in her own shoulder blades, and she leaned forward and gave her dragon a kiss on the neck. Thank you, she whispered. Once you're finished, you can stay with me, or you can go back home to your hot bath. You did well, she comforted her. Nora could tell Winter wanted to stay, but felt uneasy with all the soldiers staring at her. Nora slid off her back and embraced Winter's broad muzzle with her arms and gave her head a warm, reassuring kiss. I know. It's fine. I'll be safe. Go home. Rest up. I'll see you tomorrow, she assured her. Winter thrummed happily and launched herself up into the air. Once the swirling snow flurries had died down, Nora turned her attention back toward the soldiers. They had already started a fire, and they were roasting large hunks of meat. This time the soldiers were smiling happily toward her, grateful for the warm fire and hot meal they were preparing to eat. Nora made her way over to the officer's cooking fire and smiled when she saw Vila. Traja flashed her a jaded glower, but she didn't bring up the abduction. Instead, she played along as if the whole bloody thing had been her idea in the first place. Nora didn't care. She had other things in her mind. So, when do I meet Shadow? She asked. Everyone around the campfire suddenly became silent. All eyes fell onto Vila. Being out of the loop, Traja quickly piped in. Shadow? She asked. Vila nodded. Yes. He's a kid we found in the Baru waste. We think he's an orphan, he announced. Captain Wallace laughed. The Baru kid. That's got a good ring to it, he began, but a stern glare from Major Orrin quickly made him clamp his mouth shut. Pardon? Who? Traja asked again. Nora smiled. Shadow is the one who helped break my sword companion free from the snow. It is thanks to him everyone is alive, she explained. Vila nodded. Yes. Well, he's an orphan. We really should send him to an orphanage, he shrugged. Orrin's face darkened, but just as he was about to protest, Nora shot to her feet. An orphanage? Vila! Nora's voice trembled with rage. After all this, you can't send the poor boy to an orphanage, she snapped at him. Traja nodded. That is hardly a fitting reward, she agreed. Vila glanced over to Major Orrin, who gave him a discreet nod of affirmation. Where else would we send him? Vila asked. Nora pressed her lips together. Where is he? She asked. When he smells the meat cooking, he'll show up, Orrin assured her. Traja let out a heartfelt gasp. Poor thing, you mean he's been surviving out here on his own? He needs a family, she sighed. Nora grimaced and reluctantly settled back down. Vila shrugged. He's almost full grown. He needs a job is what he needs, he grunted. Nora perked up. That shouldn't be too hard to arrange. What sort of things is he good at? She asked. Vila shrugged. Orrin thinks he would make a good soldier, but he's too young to enlist yet. Perhaps there is somewhere he could go to further his training, he prompted. Traja scowled. A soldier? Don't be silly. He should be sent off to a nice school. Nora smiled and nodded. It would be better than the orphanage, she agreed. Vila grunted and poked at the fire. Yeah, well, he can't read. Nora's smile fell. She sensed the concern through the bond and the sadness in Vila's voice. When she glanced up, she quickly noted the rest of the soldiers' faces, staring gloomily into the crackling yellow flames. Well, you never know. He might learn how to read in the orphanage, Vila insisted. We aren't sending him to an orphanage, Nora snapped at him. Vila lowered his head. Fine. Where do we send a wildling that can't read and dreams of becoming a soldier, he demanded. Nora's thin nostrils flared. I can ask a few favors. Vila shook his head. If you mean Founder's Keep, they will never accept him. He's too young, and he isn't ready to be a sword companion. You couldn't put that on him when he doesn't even know what it is, he objected. Nora glared at Vila angrily. It wasn't like him to be so critical of her in public. He doesn't have to join right away. I can pull a few strings, and he'll get a job as a stable boy. That'll get him room and board. And if it happens to be nearby this barnyard, and if he happens to show interest, that is up to him, she insisted. Traja beamed happily. That's a wonderful idea. Sort of let him think it's his own idea. This barnyard will be nearby. I don't know a young boy that didn't like wooden practice swords, she agreed. Vila grit his teeth. Fine. It's still a bad idea, he insisted. Do you have any better ideas? That's not an orphanage, Nora demanded. Vila continued to poke at the fire. I suppose it's worth a try, he grunted. Lieutenant Gojin grinned. I think it's a wonderful idea. His grin faded as he realized by the fierce glares by both the two mages, Vila and the rest of the officers, that his opinion was not welcome or wanted. It was then a slender young 14-year-old reached in and sliced off a large hunk of meat from the fire and plopped himself down on the ground. Everyone became still. Nora glanced over toward her sword companion, and Vila nodded. Nora attempted her best and most soft and compassionate smile she could manage. Hello, young sir. What might your name be? She called in a soft, sing-song voice. Shadow gave her a sideways look as he chewed loudly and glanced toward Major Orin and grinned. He's a boy, not a dragon, Vila murmured. Nora flashed Vila an agitated glare, indicating she did not want any distractions. Thank you for your help, she announced. Shadow ignored her. Vila sighed as he watched the young boy take the overly big helmet, flip it upside down, and pack it full of meat before meandering off. Nora glanced worriedly over toward Vila. What's wrong? Did I scare him? She asked. Excuse me, young man, where do you think you're going? Traja called. Didn't you hear Magi Frey was talking to you? She asked. Shadow glanced back and scrunched his eyebrows at Traja as he noisily sucked the grease from his fingers. He doesn't talk, Vila grunted. I see that. Is he deaf or mute? Traja asked. She tried to move forward, but Shadow took a step back. Vila grimaced. Definitely not deaf, he sighed. We aren't going to hurt you, Traja insisted. Do you like cookies? She asked. Shadow blinked, and his long raven-black hair flopped over as he tilted his head to the other side and reached into the helmet and stuffed a greasy piece of meat into his mouth. Nora pulled out a gold coin and held it up so it glinted enticingly in the firelight. Shadow shook his head. Instead, he pointed. Nora turned toward Vila. Vila frowned. Nora pouted. Her sword companion rolled his eyes and unclasped his sword and handed it over to her. Nora grinned and passed the sword over to Traja, who held it up toward Shadow. Shadow grinned, and he hurried back over to the campfire, but the moment he clasped the sheath, his eyes rolled to the back of his head, and he crumpled to the ground. What did you do to him? Orin demanded. He's only asleep, Traja assured him. Vila glared at her and quickly took his sword back. That was unnecessary, he growled. Traja ignored him and quickly knelt by Shadow as she placed her hand on his forehead. I can't sense any injuries. Just a gap. A distant gap in his mind. Something horrible must have happened, she whispered, and she shook her head. I can't see into it. I'm not even sure if he can either. Or if he just doesn't want to, perhaps it's better left that way, she sighed. Nora grimaced. She felt so strange around hurt people. She wanted to help so much, but she only had a sledgehammer to work with. Empathy did not come naturally to her, and she did not have the skill in mending that Treasure had. Menders didn't have to be powerful or quick casters, but they had to be thorough and precise. Nora could outcast most mages and scatter armies, but she couldn't put anyone back together again. She understood the basic concept well enough to possibly heal a bruise or two. Then again, she had poor Vila to practice on. Tragically, she was more likely to turn a welt into a giant goose egg than do any good. Healing was so complex. It required extensive knowledge of the human body as well, to give it what it wanted and needed without making a giant mess of things. For a time, she had thought about trying to get into Mender's Hall to earn a 3rd point on her star, but after the incident, after accidentally killing a Mender, she doubted she would ever be welcome at Founder's Keep again. I suppose I could contact Simmons to help get a meeting with Lady Saville, Treasure prompted. Nora blinked. She had been daydreaming, but now she stared at Treasure in utter disbelief. Treasure was actually trying to help her, or at least help her help Shadow. And worst and most shocking of it all was that Treasure could contact Simmons, which meant she blotted the idea from her mind. Simmons was like a brother to her. She couldn't imagine the likes of Treasure getting her claws into him. I see. I could send a letter, Nora ventured. Treasure grit her teeth. Yes, I could do that as well, she agreed. Care to take a walk? She asked. Nora hesitated and glanced around, offering a polite smile to the officers around the campfire, and nodded. Once they were out of hearing range, she tentatively resumed the conversation. I had no idea you two were so close, she remarked. Treasure's large hazel eyes swiveled around, and she locked hard onto Nora. Naturally. Menders are not supposed to have relations to dragon riders, or go flying, she pointed out. Nora grimaced. She wanted to bury herself into the snow. She was doomed. I won't tell, if you won't, Treasure assured her. Nora felt a lump form in her throat. She was being blackmailed. She assumed Treasure merely wanted to help the poor boy, but in reality she was going to be using her as an excuse to see Simmons. There was no other explanation for her to be so close and having such a strong telepathic link with him unless they were somehow romantically involved. Nora wanted to kick herself. Apparently, Simmons hadn't flown out all the way from Glendon just to see her. Treasure smiled. Are you all right? You look pale. Yes, I'm just surprised, Treasure inquired. Are you two? Nora couldn't say the B word. Bonded? Treasure asked. Nora nodded. Not exactly. Not like a sword companion is, but we are close, she assured her. Nora wanted to bang her head against a rock. She now wondered about all the private conversations she had with her closest friend. Simmons was like a brother to her. How much did he spill to her nemesis? Treasure smirked. Simmons is my brother, she announced. Nora turned and stared at Treasure. I didn't know Simmons had a younger sister, she remarked in surprise. The mender rolled her eyes. He doesn't. I am the oldest, she corrected her. Nora blinked again. She wasn't entirely sure how to respond or how to apologize for things that she had been thinking but had not said. Was that a thing? Did it count? Treja smiled. It would be good to see him again. I regret not being able to see him before he was called back. Thank you for making him stay and rest. Also, I have decided not to report you to General Gordon, Treja declared. Nora gulped. She stammered, while she stood a whole head taller than the mender. She suddenly felt as if she was standing trial, and Treja had the gavel and was preparing to pass a sentence. After all, it was an emergency. I completely understand, Treja acknowledged in a sinisterly sweet tone. Just remember, you owe me big. Of course, she winced. Thank you, she managed to mumble. The mender smiled, a smug, shark-like smile. I know, she agreed. Nora fought the urge to bash the mender over the head with a rock and bury her in the snow, and then grab Vila and fly away forever. Treja didn't say what the favor was going to be. She couldn't figure out if Treja already had something particular in mind, or if she was going to just keep it in her pocket for when she felt like she needed it. Or worse, continually hold it over her head forever for pure satisfaction. So, Nora began, as cordially as she could, how did you get stationed in Helvisti? She asked. Treja smirked. Same as everybody, I suppose, she sighed. Well, sort of. I didn't kill anybody, she added. Nora grit her teeth. I'm sure it couldn't be that bad, she cried. Treja shrugged. It depends who you ask, she sighed. You know everything about me, Nora huffed. Yes, well, I will keep it that way for now, she grinned. Fine, but I will find out, Nora insisted. Treja's confident grin waned. It was just over a boot, she huffed. Nora blinked. A boot? She half asked, half remarked. She wondered if she had any footwear or garments that she would maim or kill over. The mender rolled her eyes. Not that kind of boot. You know, a boot. One of those wannabe sword hands in the practice yards, she explained. Oh, Nora remarked. That did make a little more sense. Sort of. Anyways, I challenged another mage to a duel, she sighed. Did you win? Nora asked curiously. Treja shook her head glumly. It was broken up before we could even start. Why? Elementals and field mages duel all the time, Nora asked. Because menders aren't allowed to do anything fun, Treja scowled angrily. Nora stifled an amused smile, and Treja glowered at her angrily. You elementals think you're all big and tough. I'll have you know, if I hadn't wanted to go with you, I would have stopped you. Nora couldn't hold back her smile any longer as she burst out in laughter. A moment later, Nora found herself laid out flat in the snow, staring up into the sky. When she sat up, she heard Vila call out her name. She turned to look over at him as he came running to her side. What happened? Are you all right? He gasped. Nora stared at him in dazed bewilderment, wondering how long she'd been out. She's fine. She just slipped, Treja assured him. But Vila ignored the mender, and his focus remained on Nora. Nora reluctantly nodded her head. I'm fine. I just slipped, she agreed. Vila frowned. She could sense his suspicion. She could sense he could tell that she was lying, and she quickly leaned over and kissed him. Nora smiled. Despite his stoic, unreadable face, his concentration had been shattered into a million pieces. I'm fine, she assured him. Vila reluctantly nodded, and she allowed him to help her up. Thank you. I'm fine, just startled, she assured him. Vila grunted and turned to leave, but before he did, he paused and suspiciously glanced over his shoulder. She smiled at him and gave him a quick wave to assure him everything was all right. Once Vila was gone, Traja smirked. Sorry, were you going to say something? She asked. Nora proceeded to dust the snow off her coat. I see your point, she grumbled. Would you like to know how I did it? Traja asked with a smug grin. Nora paused and quickly put aside her pride. Yes, I would, she admitted. I bet you would, she teased. Nora cursed under her breath, and she quickly changed topics. So, once you arrange for Simmons to allow me to discreetly enter Dragonmount at night, he and I will introduce the Shadow Boy to Lady Sybil, she declared. Traja nodded. Exactly. But I'm coming with you, she announced with a grin. Nora was about to object, but she bit her tongue. I thought menders weren't allowed to fly, she muttered. Are you going to tell on me? Traja asked in mock horror. No, she sighed. I think we're going to be good friends, Traja chimed. Nora chewed her lower lip as she reluctantly trudged behind the mender. When they returned to camp, Traja beamed happily at everyone, while Nora grimly plopped herself by the campfire next to her sword companion. Vila gave her a worried look, but she forced herself to smile at him. Are you all right? Do I need to kill anyone? Vila asked, but he spoke through the soul bond, so no one else could know or hear what they were saying. Nora closed her eyes. Do I interfere in your affairs? She demanded. Yes, quite often, Vila chuckled. Nora's eyes snapped open, and she glared at her sword companion. Everyone else around the campfire carried on, laughed, and shared happy stories, utterly oblivious of the silent argument between herself and Vila. Finally, Vila quit pestering her, and she hurriedly took the moment of reprieve to crawl into a bedroll to get some sleep. My name is Marco, and I am the author, narrator, and glee man for Founders Keep. I wrote this during the lockdowns, and it is an audiobook for free on my YouTube channel at Dragon Audiobooks. If you want to read along, and if you absolutely love the book, you can get the hard copy, and you can get it in digital. The cool thing about this book is that you can share it with your friends, and you know, J.R. Tolkien. Would you like to write him? You can't. He's gone. J.K. Rowling. You probably could messenger. She's a busy lady. She might get back to you. But me, I am here to entertain you. I am not just a writer. I am a glee man, if you will. And I do podcasts. I do audiobooks. So not only will you get this audiobook, you'll get all the other stuff that I put out on YouTube. And the most important thing, a sword. The most important thing, there will be dragons. There'll be lots of dragons, and most fantasy books, dragons have gone extinct and they're gone. These dragons are very much here and real. So there will be dragons. Uh, so Founders Keeps, fancy fiction, magic, mages, swords, true love, revenge, Dragon Audiobooks. Follow me on Twitter, Dragon Audiobooks, YouTube.